One concept from the book that I found interesting was the idea of cultural imperialism, which the book defines as domination through the spread of cultural products. My personal definition of cultural imperialism is when other countries or nations try to use colonialism on other groups or nations by getting rid of their cultures and replacing with their own because it's superior. Now, sometimes when talking about cultural imperialism, the relationships between economics, nationalism, and culture can make it difficult for us to understand how much of an impact it really has on our lives. The book talks about how this one scholar, John Tomlinson, identified five different ways of thinking about it: cultural domination, media imperialism, nationalist discourse, critique of global capitalism, and critique of modernity. Now, because economic, technological, and financial resources aren't equally distributed, including some people just not having any access to said resources, some groups are put at a disadvantage to maintain and practice their identities and traditions. This also means that they're more vulnerable to things like cultural imperialism. It's also important to understand that the pop culture we consume is, how I like to put it, one of the heads of the hydra of cultural imperialism by portraying problematic representations of other cultures and groups. In other words, a country using cultural imperialism forces their perception of other cultures and nations onto people within their own nation and abroad. One example of this from my perspective, specifically regarding the aspect of media imperialism, is the way that the United States has used their power and status on the world stage to portray an incredibly Islamophobic and anti Muslim portrayal of Islam and Muslims. Ever since 9/11, there's been a lot of Islamophobic and anti Muslim sentiment in American media. This has been shown through multiple TV shows and movies showing Islam as something barbaric and oppressive, as well as showing Muslims as horrible, bigoted people. One example of this anti Muslim sentiment that I've seen a lot of in American media is trying to show that women wearing things to cover their hair and their bodies, so things like hijab, niqab, and abaya, there's like a lot of media shows that women are only doing so because of misogyny that they experience, as well as being forced or coerced into wearing them, which isn't really the case. Now, in my opinion, part of why the US has done this is to sort of try and give us an air of moral superiority, as well as to try and justify our violent actions in countries like Afghanistan, Iran, and Iraq.